The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the Mutual Broadcast Network. If you'd like to send an email, studio@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV, and our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. Last hour, we had Dr. Kevin Randall on talking about the Roswell crash and his new book. This hour, we're going to be talking about another one of the great UFO stories of all time, and we're talking about the Travis Walton case. Joining me this hour is Jennifer Stein. She is the co-producer, writer, and director and developer of the newest award-winning film about Travis Walton UFO incident from 1975. Now, the film is based on Travis Walton's book, Fire in the Sky. The film provides a more accurate accounting of the 1975 events than its predecessor, the Paramount motion picture by the same name, which was released in 1995. For more information, visit www.traviswaltonthemovie.com. And Jennifer Stein, welcome back to the X-Zone. Great having you with us again.
Thank you, Rob. It's a real pleasure to be back on the air with you.
Tell me, congratulations, first of all, on all the awards you're winning with this, with your newest film. Why do you think the Travis Walton case is still of such great interest to the UFO community?
Well, his case is really very unique. There are many characteristics about it that make it stand out as one of the all-time unique and informative cases. He wasn't the only person who encountered and saw this UFO. There were 7 loggers who all encountered this craft. Travis also went missing for 5 days. I think it's one of the longest abduction stories in history. And when he went missing, this huge search, ensued looking for him. And the boys that he was working with on a logging crew were all accused of murder because no one really believed their story.
Right.
So as a result, they all underwent lie detection tests, which you never happen in a UFO case that you're trying to debunk or prove or get facts on. The fact that all of these other 5 loggers who passed, the first initial lie detection test is a very unique fact. And then to add on top of that, Travis had an encounter with more than one species, which was very unusual to come forward at that time in 1975 and have that much detail come out about his case. As we've begun to know more and more now since 1975, the facts of Travis's event still continue to be verified through other UFO events. So it's really, really unique.
I have to tell you, I've had Travis on the show many times. And whenever you're talking to him, I know whenever I talk to him, there's only one word that I can associate with his encounter, and that's credible.
Yes.
Like, he's a very honest, very down-to-earth, very one-to-one kind of guy.
Yeah, and I think that really comes out in the film, which is why it's it's doing so well. People walk away from it with a sense that they know him better as a person, and they understand how this ruined his life in many ways. There was a 40th anniversary this year of the event, and the film commemorated that 40th anniversary.
I'm sorry about that. The computer glitch. You see what happens when the aliens get inside a computer board?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Please continue.
It's fine. I was just talking about the fact that this past year was the 40th anniversary of Travis's event. And the film was screened at this special 40th anniversary conference that we held in Heber, which is the town where Travis was returned. So it was really a special opportunity to be there with everyone and screen the film and see the community, because many people in the community were ridiculed as a result. You know, people involved in the police and all the other members of the crew and their families all underwent a lot of years of ridicule. So to kind of have them experience the feeling of being somewhat vindicated, because none of them have changed their stories after 40 years. They're really the heroes of this whole event. It's Mike Rogers and John Goulet, Pierce, and Dwayne Smith, and Kenny Peterson. All these guys really deserve awards.
All right, stand by, Jen. You and I have to take a brief commercial break. X-Zone Nation, Jennifer Stein is our special guest. And we're talking to Jennifer about the new Travis Walton movie that is out. Visit www.traviswaltonthemovie.com. I am Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone. We'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue right here on the Mutual Broadcast Network. My guest this hour is Jennifer Stein, and we're talking about the new Travis Walton movie that is out. It's an award-winning movie, and visit the website for more information, www.traviswaltonthemovie.com. Jen, when did you begin to consider making the Travis film, and how did it come about?
Well, it's an interesting story. I kind of didn't set out to make a film. I guess that's how the best films get made. I was asked to help coordinate a conference in Heber around the 40th anniversary. Actually, my dear friend Peter Robbins, who's an author, I think you've also had.
Oh, yes.
As well. Yeah. Peter asked me to be a coordination assistant for the Roswell conference that happens every year around the 4th of July weekend in Roswell. Since I'd done a lot of conference coordination in the Philadelphia area and I was involved in MUFON, I went out there to help him. And Travis was one of the presenters that year. This was in 2010. And Peter's been involved in the McMinnville UFO conference every year and the Exeter conference. And a couple of others. There's one in Maine called Experience or Speak. He helped to sort of coordinate and put that together. So Peter and I were basically having dinner with Travis, and we said, Travis, why don't you have a conference? And he said, well, I really need help putting it together. I know how to present, but I don't really know how to organize a conference. So Peter and I kind of stepped up to the bat and offered to help get the ball rolling and coach and counsel and help write and do outreach for his conference. And in that process of planning towards the 40th anniversary and planning a couple conferences we were hoping lining up to that 40th anniversary event, I said to Travis, what do you want to do? What do you want to have people experience when they come to your conference? And he said, well, I've got to take them to the woods. I have to take them to the forest where this event happened, and we should do it on the actual anniversary. So it'll be 40 years to the day, or 39 years to the day, or 38 or 35, because we were, at this point, it was the 35th anniversary we were talking about. And my thinking, I'm a former events coordinator in the Philly area, and I'm thinking, you want to take 50, 60, 70 people up into a national forest at night, walking a half hour in. Oh, I'm thinking, danger.
Exactly.
Why don't we have a plan B? Why don't we do like a little film about you and the boys in the forest? And in the event that it snows, Travis, and we can't get people up there, you'll have a film you can show them. So that's how this whole thing got started. I had been doing a bunch of film work already at that point, and I thought it was something I could handle. And I've loved Travis for years and respected him so for his work. And I've seen firsthand the ridicule he experienced, and I thought, you know what, if I can push up my sleeves and do something like this for him, it would be a great feather in my cap, and I will have gone to my grave knowing I've done something special, at least for the UFO world.
Well, I think you've got more than one feather in your cap for this work.
Well, thank you, Rob. But that's how this got started, and that first film is actually a separate standalone piece, and it's called Tracking Sky Fire. It's something that Travis should have for sale on his website. I don't think he does yet, but he should. And it's kind of a walkthrough in the forest with some of the other boys in the crew, and Travis explaining what happened, where it happened, and things like that. It's not a high-end piece of film, but it's an accurate piece of film, and it would stand alone in the event that we couldn't take people up to the forest.
How does Travis deal with skepticism?
Well, I think he appreciates skepticism because he, like a lot of people in this field, realize that we need to separate fact from fiction.
Right.
And we need to have really good standards that we use to evaluate cases. And when you start to dig into the data, if stuff doesn't match up, that's the result of what a good skeptic does. But skepticism and debunking are very different things, and a lot of people don't know how to define the difference between them. But if you're someone like Travis, he can tell you firsthand what debunking is like. These people just never bother to do the research, never bother to check the facts, make things up off the top of their head, and put them out there because they have links to the media. And people assume what they're talking about is correct because they try to link something together that might be some logical connection. But if you do your fact-checking, you discover quite quickly that they actually don't know what they're talking about. So I think skepticism is important, and I tried to bring together media people and good skeptics into the film about Travis. When we looked for experts to talk about this, we had Stanton Friedman and Lee Spiegel and Ben, I'm blanking on Ben's last name now. How could I do that? From Fact or Fiction, from Sci-Fi. Ben Hansen, he was on the program and in the film as well. So skeptics are important because they're going to ask really good questions.
So why do you think that Travis's case is so important?
Well, it really has stood the test of time throughout so many decades, and it was the first of its kind in many, many ways. His case is not a first-person witness testimony. There were 7 loggers who all encountered this craft in the forest in 1975. Travis, of course, went missing as a result of himself running right up under this craft because he wanted to get a good look at it. He was injured by this craft. That's pretty unique. The boys, were frightened and drove away, but when they came back to try to find him, he wasn't there, and he was missing for 5 days. I mentioned earlier that we have all of these boys undergoing lie detection tests, which you never have in UFO cases. It's very expensive to do a polygraph examination on someone, and no one would normally go to that cost or expense. And the fact that they all underwent that before Travis was returned is really unique. And all the people looking for him makes it, you can't debunk this case and say it didn't happen. Something happened for sure. We don't know where Travis was or who he was with when he was gone. But he had memory as soon as he woke up on the street when he was returned in Heber. He woke up, he looked up, he saw this craft leaving, he remembered exactly seeing it, and he had conscious recall. He didn't have to be regressed. And that's also sort of unique.
Was there any collaborating evidence from independent sources, for example, radar targets that night, either military or commercial? Were there any aircraft sightings by pilots in the area? Is there anything that could be attached to this story to give it what skeptics may expect as more credibility?
Well, interesting you would say. I don't know if Carl and Jim Lorenzo, who were the heads of APRO at the time, I don't know if they were in the habit of looking for air traffic, control records or military sightings of unusual aircraft at that time. I don't know how much that was a standard protocol as it is now in MUFON.
Right.
But there is one very interesting case that we uncovered while we were working on the Travis film. We didn't put it in the Travis film, but maybe we could have. There was an FBI agent who was camping with his wife on an adjacent hill near where this event happened, and he was an undercover FBI agent. So he saw the whole thing happen. He saw the craft, and he saw the big burst, and then he saw the craft take off. There was too much forest between them to actually see Travis himself being hit or being abducted by any kind of aliens, but he saw the craft, and he actually notified military authorities to find out if he should come forward because the men in his crew were being accused of murder. And in Arizona at that time, even without proof of a body, they could have gone to court, been convicted, and gone to the electric chair or hung without the proof of a body at that point in Arizona. So he was sort of like on the hook if Travis wasn't returned or these boys actually went to trial, he was going to come forward.
But being a member of the Justice Department...
Right. He did not, and he was advised by his seniors, don't divulge your undercover agency, or your relationship, because your job will end, and that's not good for the government, and we don't really want to touch the stop it with a 10-foot pole, so don't come forward unless you absolutely have to. But they gave him permission to come forward to prove the innocence of these other men if needed. So that's a little confirmation that, yes, in fact, it did happen. And when I interviewed Marlon Gillespie, he was the chief at the time in Holbrook, the police chief, and he was in charge of the investigation and worked very closely with Deputy Ellison. Marlon had many sightings himself as well. He didn't have a sighting that night but he had many sightings similar to what they encountered over the years there. And, this wasn't the first call he was sent out on. It was the first missing person as a result of a UFO event. But it wasn't the first call he had been called out on regarding UFO events.
All right, Jennifer, stand by. You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Exonation, my guest this hour is Jennifer Stein. And for more information about this fascinating movie, this great story, one that makes you wonder, scratch your head and say, what if? Visit www.traviswaltonthemovie.com, and Jennifer and I will be back. We'll be back from this commercial break as we continue right here from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Whatever you do, do not go away. back, everyone. We're talking about the new movie, the Travis Walton movie. www.traviswaltonthemovie.com. Jennifer Stein is our special guest. And Jennifer is the young lady responsible for getting the movie out there and for bringing renewed interest and awareness into this case that goes all the way back to 1975. And Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. Great pleasure having you on the show again.
Well, it's really a pleasure for me. Thanks for inviting me on.
Jennifer, let me ask you a question. Philip Klass, he went after Travis with a vengeance. What was his motive behind it?
Well, we believe, was really a paid debunker by the military. We've sort of come to that conclusion. I actually spent time with Kathy Martin and Stanton Friedman, who are working on a book about Philip Klass, which will be out soon. And we went into the archives at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, and we read, hours and hours and hours and files and files and files, and saw the people he was cohorting with, and who invited him on vacation, and who was probably paying him under the table. And obviously he was a friend of Donald Menzel's, and, the people involved in the Condon report. And I think it was Mr. Hoover, President Hoover. He had many correspondences back and forth. So you can see that, and when you look at the other letters he wrote to other people involved in UFO events, like Betty and Barney Hill, Kathy Martin's aunt and uncle, you can see that his real mode of operation was to pull any kind of credibility out from underneath of the story, attack the character of the people. And he did that very well. He grabbed onto the Travis Walton case because he felt there's no way this case can get out there. It's just, because it made international news. That's the other unique thing about Travis's case. A lot of people don't necessarily decide they want to come forward.
That's right.
When they have a UFO sighting, but Travis really didn't have a choice in the matter. He had been missing, and by the time he was back, he was an internationally known name. The phone was ringing off the hook on the local police and newspapers. So he had to come forward. And he actually tried not to. His brother really tried to protect him. So Philip really wanted to latch onto this case and discredit it and discredit the boys in the crew, which he really tried to do. And Mike Rogers was the crew boss. And Mike is actually writing a book, which I think is recently just out now as well. It was 30 years in the making himself, or 35, almost 40 years in the making. So Mike was the one who was the oldest crew member, and he was the one that wrote the most number of letters back and forth to Philip Klass. And reading them, it's like, wow. I just love to publish those letters.
I would imagine so.
It would be a great book just reading the letters. You can see the way Philip would manipulate and take things out of context and reword things and use half statements instead of full statements, and even misheard things, which he never wanted to give up, that he'd made a mistake and he misheard things.
People talk about Travis all the time, and I'm not trying to take anything away from Travis at this point. But what about the other members of the logging team who were witnessed to this event? How has it affected their lives?
Well, that logging crew broke apart that day. They never worked again together. And Mike Rogers had to find other guys on his crew to go back and fill that job. The youngest member of the crew, Steve Pierce, was hounded by Philip Klass because he was the youngest and probably the most vulnerable. So Philip thought if he bribed him with a $10,000 bribe, maybe he could get him to come forward and say, yeah, it really didn't happen, and Travis made it all up, and he'd be $10,000 richer. Now, $10,000 is, a lot of money today. It was a hell of a lot of money in 1975.
Exactly.
And one point, Steve actually sort of considered it. Like, he didn't say, no, I would never do that. He had conversations with Philip, and Philip hounded him and followed him and chased him state to state, even when he changed his name and changed his job and tried to get away from Philip. Philip tracked him down, flew out there to Dallas where he had moved to, took him out to dinner, and really tried to convince him to take this bribe. And that, it made Steve want to go underground. I mean, he did. He changed his name. He really didn't have anything to do with Travis for almost 20, maybe almost 25 years, until he saw Travis on television. And he thought, well, maybe I ought to contact him because, maybe I could be on television too. Maybe Travis was making some money doing this, and that's when he kind of started to surface again and started to do some speaking engagements that Travis invited him to do. So Mike and Travis remained friends, but, all these boys underwent ridicule in the town, and a lot of people don't realize most of them had Mormon backgrounds of some, intensity or another. Sometimes they were married to people who were Mormon, but they lived in a Mormon town. Travis himself, where he grew up, he was surrounded by like a Mormon clan. 4 or 5 houses was all one family's group, and those were all his neighbors when he was growing up. So you can imagine that type of close-knit community trying to deal with this type of bizarre story that they were not happy about getting out as well. It really destroyed a lot of their lives. Doors and opportunities were closed to all of these boys, especially Travis.
I remember reading that one of the conspiracy thoughts why this entire Walton case may have been hoaxed was because of the problems that they were having meeting the contract with the government on clearing land.
Well, that's an assumption we all make from Philip Glass, because that's one of these ideas that Philip just reached up and grabbed out of the sky as the reason they came up with this, cockamamie story that they had a UFO encounter. I mean, they could have come up with other reasons as well, but what people don't understand, and Mike went well into this in a recent interview I did with him, that there are always problems on a job.
Sure.
You bid it, just like when a builder builds a house, he doesn't always meet the deadline, but there are stipulations built into the contract that if you don't meet the deadline, then you get paid less, or you don't get paid at all, which is the case. You get paid for what you've accomplished and what you've completed, but sections of the job that you haven't completed, you don't get paid for, and you have to rebid to complete those jobs to get paid for them, because the Forestry Service will only hold a contract open for a certain period of time. They want, fair bids from multiple people, because they need to keep their prices down, So they'll look for bids from a number of different people who want to spend their time going up there and clearing, underbrush. What they were doing was called timber stand improvement, and they were clearing underbrush and what would become fire or fuel for a fire. In the summer, if there was a lightning strike or a campfire or a cigarette that, got thrown out of a car and started a fire,
right.
To keep the fire down, you want to take that underbrush and take those small sapling trees that are going to inhibit the health of another bigger tree and pile them up, and you burn them when it's winter, when there's snow on the ground. You go back and you put gasoline on these piles and you burn them, and that the fire won't spread because there's snow on the ground. So that's what they would do. They were building these slash piles, as they called them, which were like 4x4 stacks of lumber that would be burned later in the year. So Philip Glass just got this idea because, someone may have mentioned they were behind, which was true. They were a little behind.
It happens. It happens.
They weren't far behind, and that happened a lot. Like some days it would be raining and they couldn't go up and work, and then other days they'd catch up and then they'd fall behind, or then there'd be a holiday, or somebody would get sick, or somebody's truck would break down and they'd fall behind, and then they'd catch up. It was the normal way of working. But Philip came up with this idea that that's why they came up with this story. But there was no truth to it. And if you talk to the logging, other loggers, or you even talk to the Forestry Service, they would say, well, Mike Rogers had been working for them for already 10 years. And
right.
He's a very reputable, representative. He always had a good crew with him. He always abided by the rules. He got paid, by 99% of his contracts. So there was nothing illegal about what they were doing.
Let me ask you something. You've sunk your teeth into this case and other cases. Why are UFO cases debunked and not even accepted, even with very good evidence?
Well, I think you have to go back to the Robertson panel and the Robertson report that came out of it. This was 1952. It was 4 or 5 years after the very famous Roswell event.
Right.
At that period of time, you were seeing UFOs. Is that an important cue?
I have no idea what that is, to be honest with you. It well, threw me for a loop as well.
Interfering again. Right? So if anyone listening goes and Googles the Robertson panel and the Robertson report, you can actually read it. A number of people have posted it online. You will see a protocol that was put in place by members of Congress and our government as a way to deal with the UFO stories, to get them off the front pages of the newspapers, which they had been for 5 years, from the time of Roswell right through to the 50s. It was not that uncommon. In fact, UFOs were right over the White House in 1952, and it made national news all over the place. So the government wanted to get this out of the media because they didn't want to deal with it. And I can understand why. If I was the president or I was a member of Congress and I had craft flying around in the skies that we couldn't identify or control, and they were rendering our nuclear weaponry inert, and that's a major national security issue.
Sure it is.
I probably wouldn't want to come forward either.
All right, but all these years later, we're no further ahead.
Yes, you're right. You're right, because the same protocol has been in place. And the problem becomes, how do you deal with it after 50 years, 60 years? People's heads will be on the chopping block. There's still people responsible for the secrecy today. So, saying that, I also have to say, I think there's another whole issue at play with secrecy that doesn't have anything to do with our government or other governments around the world. I think it has to do with the beings themselves that are coming here. They don't want to be disclosed, and they're doing their darndest to, jump in and jump out of our reality as people who see them. And I myself am an experiencer. They disappear in an instant, almost as if they can shift out of our frame of reference or out of our plane of existence into maybe another dimension that's just parallel to us.
Do you know what I've often wondered, Jen, and maybe you can help put some light onto this? With all the computer hacking that is going on government files, different countries hacking into our files, us hacking into other files, independent hackers, people like Edward Snowden who've decided to go public with what he's done. How come there has never been any proof brought forward by any government or any hacker that UFOs or the information on UFOs has been documented by any government agency?
Well, there actually has. There was a very famous case of a young man named Gary McKinnon.
Right, and he's the one that was in the United Kingdom, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and the U.S. would like very much still to extradite him to stand trial in the United States.
But let me ask you this. We're getting close to our next break. But the fact that Hillary Clinton was exonerated for doing basically the same thing this guy did, where does that leave him now? Because I don't know very much about U.S. law, but her being exonerated from the same thing that he did, isn't that jurisprudence? And if she can't get convicted or charged, how can they convict or charge anyone else for doing the same thing?
Well, I have to throw my hands up. I think it's a really good question. I haven't really studied the case of Gary McKinnon and Hillary and compared them, so I'll leave that as a comparison that you're making. But we live with a lot of inadequacies and discrepancies all the time.
We sure do. Jen, I hate to do this to you, but I've got to take my final break. Great having you with us. Super conversation. Great movie. Exonation. Do yourself a favor. www.traviswaltonthemovie.com. I'm Rob McConnell. Jen Stein and I will be back on the other side of this break as we continue this hour here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada on the Mutual Broadcast Network. Don't go away. Stein is our special guest this hour. www.traviswaltonthemovie.com. Jennifer, before we get back to the interview, I have a message here for you from one of our listeners, and it is, I love that her motives were pure in trying to help a friend. I am so glad it was her that got to make this film, and I hope it raises the awareness and her dedication is rewarded.
Oh, well, sweet. Well, from her wish to God's ears, as they say, right?
So where do we go from here?
Well, I have a comment based on the last, listener's write-in that she just wrote. People that listen to your show can actually play a role and play a part. I am hoping that I can actually get this film to a network. But what makes networks pay attention is what's going on online these days. YouTube and Vimeo and things like that. When a trailer gets enough hits, like upwards of 50,000 to 100 hits, that means that people are paying attention to it. And if people want to see this Travis film sold to a major network, they can help promote it and tell people about it. I mean, I know that the bottom line is that I may sell a couple more DVDs in the process, which won't hurt because I put out my own money in making this film, so that would be really good. But I'm never going to make my money back just by selling a couple DVDs here or there. What will really do the kicker is to be able to sell it to a network, because then I'll have money to make another film.
But let me ask you this, and I don't want to seem as if I'm being off center here, but how did the first movie do, and why do you think your movie, that is not done by a recognized production facility, it doesn't have the marketing ability of what was it, Paramount, who did the last one? How can you try to even compare with Paramount?
I can't, and you're absolutely right. And most people would say, "Oh, she was a total fool to do that."
But you're forgetting the one thing that I thought you would mention right off the bat.
What was that?
Travis Walton is in your movie.
Well, I mean, it's such a good story. Of course. I mean, that's why I made it. It was one of the best, uncontested and easily proven stories. Yeah. And I just felt like there was so much impact and so much good that could come from sharing his story. And it could help be a breakthrough film, I think, as a documentary. I mean, little films here and there help move people along in their consciousness.
Is your film going to be at the Sundance?
You know, Sundance has very, very strict rules for putting it in their festival. I'd love to say I can get it in there, but I don't think I can, because they have to be the first exclusive place you show your film. And I chose to show it at Open Minds. First of all, I couldn't get it done in time to put it a year in advance in Sundance before the 40th anniversary. And I really knew that the way it would get its legs is through the UFO community, because speaking to the choir when I talk to them, but I think the film also helps people who are closed-minded to the topic. I've had people come up to me and say, "Oh, my husband, we could never talk about this, and now he takes it seriously." Even I've had some people with former military positions who weren't out in the field, but they had desk jobs, and they were totally against the UFO concept, and going to UFO conferences. They would never do that.
Jen, we're running out of time really fast. We'll have to have you back on to talk about this great venture that you've done, and congratulations on the award. Congratulations on the film. We'll do our very best to try and get the hits you need. But where can our listeners see your movie? Is it available online?
But right now they can only buy it from me. It's not available for Vimeo or anything like that. Once I sell it to a network, then we'll talk about other distribution.
Sounds like a plan, and that's at TravisWaltonTheMovie.com. Jennifer Stein, thank you so much for joining us. Continued success, my friend, and I look forward to the next time we meet here in the X Zone.
Thank you. Me too.
All right, X Zone, I'll be back on the other side of this break with the news as we continue from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.